Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding what is arguably China's ultimate secret weapon. It's a hidden leverage point that silently dictates the future of, well, literally everything, from the commercial electronics in your house to top-tier national defense. We constantly hear about trade wars and tariffs, right? But the real battleground? It actually isn't steel, and it's definitely not soybeans. It's buried deep underground, and the insanely complex science required to get it out is something America simply can no longer afford to ignore. To really grasp the stakes here, I want you to think about your daily life for just a second. What do you think is the invisible thread connecting that smartphone buzzing in your pocket, the new electric vehicle driving down your street, and an ultra-advanced military weapon flying high above us? It's a question that has quite literally kept Pentagon officials and Silicon Valley tech CEOs awake at night. Okay, let's dive into this. The answer is rare earth elements. And to put the massive national security stakes into perspective right out of the gate, consider this. A single F-35 fighter jet contains about 100 pounds of rare earths. 100 pounds! They're woven directly into its navigation, its communication, its radar systems. Without these specific materials, the most advanced military technology in the entire world simply cannot function.
All right, part one, the invisible tech spices. So what exactly are these elements? I absolutely love this analogy from Dr. Julie Klinger, an expert in environmental studies. She notes that in their purest form, rare earths aren't just your average rocks. They are elemental metals. We're talking deep cuts on the periodic table here, things like neodymium and dysprosium. You don't build an entire car out of them. Instead, you use them exactly like spices in cooking. Just a tiny pinch enables a magnet to be incredibly small but phenomenally powerful. That is the literal magic that makes your phone vibrate or guides a smart bomb straight to its target.
Moving on to part two. The processing choke point.
Now, the greatest misconception in this entire story is actually the name itself. They aren't rare at all. They're actually relatively abundant in the Earth's crust. The true strategic bottleneck, the real problem, is what happens after you dig them up. Let's walk through this incredibly complex supply chain, adapted from a Defense 360 framework. Getting a rare earth element from dirt into an F-35 involves 5 grueling steps. First, you have to mine the ore, then separate it into oxides, refine it all the way down to a pure metal, form those metals into alloys, and finally manufacture the magnets. If you break a single link anywhere in this chain, the whole system collapses. And this highlights a really fascinating paradox. Mining, that first step, is happening right now in places like California and Australia. It's relatively straightforward. But processing and separating, wow, that is a total nightmare of complex 1980s-era chemistry. The elements are so chemically similar that pulling them apart requires this process called solvent extraction. It's dirty, it's highly toxic, and it's a technically demanding capability that the West largely just abandoned decades ago, and that left the expertise highly centralized in exactly one country.
So what's the result of that complex centralization? It's a staggering reality. China controls roughly 94% of global rare earth magnet manufacturing. 94%. Plus, they process about 90% of the world's raw rare earths. Through decades of state-funded research and very deliberate industrial strategy, they've built an ecosystem that gives them a near monopoly. They hold immense, unparalleled leverage over the supply chains that the entire rest of the world relies on. Which brings us to part 3, China's export weapon. You see, when you control 94% of a critical component, market economics quickly bleed into geopolitics. And we don't even have to guess what happens when that supply is threatened. We literally saw it happen in 2025. Following a wave of tariffs and semiconductor controls from the US, China retaliated. The resulting export restrictions caused a rapid, massive crisis. Major US auto manufacturers, including Ford, suddenly found themselves completely without the magnets needed for their vehicles. They were forced to temporarily halt production. It was a stark, scary reality check on exactly how quickly this chokehold can shut down American industries. And an outright embargo? That isn't even the only tool they have. Based on analyses from the Peterson Institute, Beijing's coercive playbook is multi-front. They can require strict export licensing, apply intense diplomatic pressure on third-party countries, or even target lean Western critical mineral startups. Crucially, they can also restrict the mobility of their expert metallurgists, basically locking down the human talent and process know-how that the West so desperately needs to catch up. Let's look at how fast this geopolitical tug-of-war is escalating. In April 2025, the initial restrictions triggered that auto crisis we just talked about. By October, China tightened the screws with a strict rule blocking foreign products that used even trace amounts of Chinese rare earths. Now, while a one-year trade truce was signed in November 2025 to temporarily restart exports, the clock is absolutely ticking. The Department of Defense has set a hard, non-negotiable deadline for January 2027. Zero Chinese rare earth magnets in U.S. defense tech.
Let's move to part 4, America's Manhattan Project. So how exactly is the United States responding to a deadline that's approaching at warp speed? Well, the front line of this battle is actually in a pretty unlikely place, Mountain Pass, California. This is home to MP Materials, the only active rare earth mine in the entire United States. And it's an incredible story. 2 former hedge fund managers took over this site when it was totally bankrupt and literally flooded with 30 million gallons of water. They bought a highly distressed asset out in the Mojave Desert, and they are now attempting to rebuild American processing capacity completely from the ground up. But they aren't doing it alone. To accelerate this whole process, the Pentagon injected an astonishing $400 million into MP Materials. And this wasn't just some standard grant. The U.S. government actually took a 15% equity stake in the company and guaranteed a 10-year price floor. It's a level of state intervention we rarely, if ever, see. It means American taxpayers are now quite literally in the rare earth business to ensure supply chain security.
And Mountain Pass? It's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A massive whole-of-government mobilization is currently underway. Beyond direct investments, the administration announced Project Vault. It sounds like something out of a spy movie, right? It's a staggering $12 billion initiative designed to establish a U.S. strategic critical minerals reserve. This is aggressive industrial policy aimed at breaking the monopoly at all costs.
Which leads us to part 5, Allied Supply Chains. Here's the thing, though. The U.S. simply cannot achieve this scale and expertise in isolation. We need friends. An ex-China ecosystem is taking shape as we speak. Australia is the most important U.S. partner here, really leading the charge in exploration and refining outside of China with companies like Lynas. Japan is absolutely critical because they actually hold the foundational patents for the highest performance magnets. Even Chinese factories have to license Japanese IP. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is stepping in with extremely deep pockets, investing heavily in joint mining and energy partnerships. It is a massive global team effort. So, the crucial question is, can all of this happen fast enough? There is a massive, massive friction between ambition and reality right now. As we mentioned, the Department of Defense wants zero Chinese rare earths in defense tech by 2027. Yet, as of recent data, the U.S. still relies on China for 71% of its rare earth imports. That's a huge gap to close. Rebuilding that complex 1980s chemistry processing capability at a true commercial scale, that takes years, if not decades. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to close out our explainer today. We are watching a fundamental, ground-up restructuring of the global tech economy. The winner won't just be whoever digs the most holes in the ground. It will be whoever can master the science, sustain the capital, and actually build the supply chain. So what do you think? Can the U.S. and its allies truly win a game of strategic patience measured in decades? Or is the reliance on this invisible tech spice simply too deeply entrenched? Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.